Yeah, are you coming?
What drew you into cinematography, and like, how did you get started? Brandon here.
What drew me to cinematography? I don't know exactly what. I know I always like photography and arts and things like that in general. So yeah, and I loved movies. And I remember, I want to say it was like 2000 or so. I was in college and I was going to become a scientist. And I saw American Beauty, and I thought it was beautiful, and it was the first time I made this connection that there's a person behind the camera who's making these decisions with the lighting and the camera work, and I thought, that sounds cool. Maybe I should do that. And so I just kind of like 180'd completely and went for it. And yeah, that was the starting point. And then went to film school and learned some stuff, and then got out of film school and worked and learned some more stuff, and continued to learn every single day. It's always, every job, no matter how simple it seems or stupid it seems, you learn something new. So, and that's what keeps drawing me to the job.
I was totally the cliche kid with my dad's video camera as a kid. And then, so I always wanted to do movies. I didn't know cinematography is what I wanted to do. Thought it was like editing or something. And then went to undergrad for production, and in a directing class, 4 people would direct a new short every single week. And when I wasn't directing, everybody was asking me to DP, and I quickly fell in love with being behind the camera and this idea of having a body of images that you created. So I chose cinematography.
My story is literally identical to Julia's. I had my dad's camera as a kid, and and then people just started asking me to shoot. The one thing I always say is when I went to film school, what I thought was directing turned out to be cinematography. Like being that involved in the specifics of the image and how you're crafting and creating a tone with visuals was what I honestly always wanted to do anyway. So, and working back closely with so many directors. So yeah, it's basically the same story.
I did not have a camera growing up, but I took a lot of photos that my parents eventually refused to develop because I was like an addict taking like 20 cameras of disposable photos a week and had to be stopped. But I went to school with John actually and with Lauren, and basically I was in the screenwriting program there. And that meant that I had no access to gear whatsoever. So when we had to do our student films, we got probably like the most bottom of the barrel cameras, and I didn't feel like I was learning anything because the footage was like, what would be comparable to like bad cell phone footage now. And so I was working freelance at the time, and I said, whatever, I'm gonna go buy a camera. And then, much as the friends have foretold, once I started shooting my own stuff and people realized in class that, hey, this looks way better than the stuff that they're giving us to use here, I started shooting for basically everyone I knew. And even though I'm primarily a director, I still am hired all the time as a cinematographer because people just really like working with their friends, and they like working with people who have a lot of experience. Particularly, I think in this case, what's cool is like weird low budget run and gun stuff. It's always good to have someone that already has that experience.
So let's get into the beginning of the process. So you're hired on by a director or producer or something. Like where do you start? What's your relationship with the director? Like the main question I get is who decides what it looks like? And I know there's no like straight answer to this. It depends on the director, but what is your process like for you?
We're going in this order again?
You can come back down if you want.
Oh, fancy. I think that most DP director relationships, if they're working, are highly, highly collaborative. I don't think that a DP is just doing whatever the director wants with no input, and I don't think that the director is just leaving everything to the the cinematographer and just sort of showing up and saying, okay, cool. Obviously, there's a bit of back and forth. Camera people tend to want to get the most beautiful, coolest shot. The director tends to want to focus on the performance. But for me, you know, I always find that I just will make a shot list with the director. They generally have a basic aesthetic style, sometimes a mood board that they're looking to achieve, and then I'm just working with what we have to get the tone that's similar to what they're looking for.
When I first got out of film school, I thought that your job as a DP was to add more polish than what, you know, to create a better look than what the director could do on their own. But now I think of it as literally in the beginning of the process, it's like being a therapist. Like you're especially the first time you work with a director, you want to get inside their head as much as possible and understand what their vision is. And part of getting inside their head for me is figuring out how visual they are. You know, like there's some directors who are going to be like, I'm thinking about this character and I want you to fill in the directorial blanks of how this is going to be shot. There's other ones who like, I've heard Tarantino and Spielberg like set a lens into camera placement and you just like the shot. You know what I mean? Like there's people who are very visual like that too. And so it's a lot of feeling that out and then also just being like, what does this movie feel like and what are all the references? And that's the most important part of the process, and it's why it bums me out when I hear about people just showing up on set having done no prep with a director, because then you're back to square one whether you're just there to make it look fancier than they could. You know what I mean? But your job is more than that, it's a creative voice.
Yeah, I think it's definitely super collaborative, and you're, instead of just going out and trying to find the prettiest thing, you're really just trying to be authentic to the script and to what the director wants. And so obviously when you read a script, you're going to have a movie in your head already. So it's about bringing your own ideas and figuring out what they want and then trying to enhance their ideas and bring more to the table and expand what they're thinking. And really just knowing what's going on that's not on the page necessarily, but what's really going on with the characters and really understanding what's happening and asking them questions and having dialogue about that. So to find the best way to tell the story.
I agree. I think it's very collaborative. And I actually find I work best with directors who have a very strong sense of what they want, at least from the get-go. Like if that first meeting is like, this is what I want. And like, great, that's a really good jumping off point. Because when you go to a meeting and they're like, what do you see? And you're like, no, that's your job, and we'll talk about it. And we can kind of compare. And if I have some cool idea, great, I'll throw it out there. So it's great when you get a director who really has this concept for and a vision for the film that they want to make, because that gives you some parameters to work within. I find that if I don't have if I have no rules, then I can just go crazy and you don't know where to stop. And it's like, if I know that you hate something, great, like that's off the table, we'll never do that. If you want every single shot to be moving, awesome, like let's figure out a way to make that cool and work. And so, yeah, it's that kind of attitude that they come with is great for me, because then that gives me my kind of foundation, and I know like here's like the 10 things for this movie that I can kind of really like nail down, like these are the things, and that helps me kind of bullet point throughout the process, like these are the things I'm trying to accomplish with the film as a whole, or maybe certain scenes, and I just know these kind of base things I've decided, because for as much prep and as much talk as you have, everything changes once you get on set. And ideally, the director's kind of vision that they have won't be one of the things that changes. And it's kind of my job to make sure that it doesn't. I can still realize it with a new location, or all of a sudden something's day for night, or whatever. You know, some piece of gear that was pivotal for this scene is not there or is broken, and now we have to improvise. So, yeah.
To add to that, and like for me, each relationship with the director is different. Working, say, with Freddie, and Jon knows this, is completely different than working with almost anybody else. He edits a movie in his head before he even talks to you. And when you sit down with him, he is very open to collaboration, but he's a very strong director. And he will emphasize one thing or the other. Like usually when we're shooting the action choreography stuff, that's not a time where I get to play with my lighting. Or if we're doing a more artistic thing, then I get to play with lighting a little bit more, and then there's a specific shot list that we go over. Whereas other directors, we sit down, we talk about different scenes or different characters or different emotions that you want to come across. So it all kind of depends on your relationship with the director, and that is where a lot of really strong friendships are forged. And sometimes you will also find yourself not ever wanting to work with someone ever again. It's very personal, it's very passionate, it's a very strong connection with somebody. And then kind of going off that note, we have a lot of aspiring directors in the audience. What kind of advice or thoughts would you have to tell them to how to work with a cinematographer and how to be prepared in prep and on set?
Can we just see how many of you guys want to be directors? Okay, cool.
Are there any aspiring cinematographers here? Yeah, girl.
Working, like for as far as the collaboration aspect of it, it's tough.
Has there been any kind of tough learning situations or things that you guys have learned with, as you are working with more and more directors that have turned out to be helpful?
I have one.
Yes.
You and I worked on a shoot many moons ago that was one of the worst shoots I think that either of us has ever worked on.
Mm-hmm.
And the director was very new to the game, but she was not very interested in compromising. And so it put us in a really tough position because she came really what she thought was prepared, but wanting to do something ludicrous like 20 or 30 setups, not just shots, but setups in one day, and thought that this was possible. And I was the DP, and Lauren was my wingman. And I felt like the director gave us a lot of shit because she thought that she would be able to like get a lot more done. And I think just as Jon said, sometimes the DP is the therapist. Sometimes the DP also has to be the realist because the director isn't necessarily the one who's actually directing the crew.
You have to be the adult sometimes.
Yeah, a lot of times it's the DP who's the one who actually knows how long it's going to take to relight something or to move gear somewhere else. And I think it's very important that if your DP brings up a concern, that you take it seriously, and it's not just somebody who's trying to pop all your balloons, but it's somebody coming with the experience of you can't do 25 setups in a single day. You're lucky if you can get 20 shots off in one day.
I have a really dry but useful answer to how I think what you should do as a director to learn how to work with a cinematographer, and that's to learn the basic terminology of shot lists as well as you can, like learn profile, 3/4, frontal, learn what a 4-shot, a 3-shot, a 2-shot, a single, a close-up, a medium close-up, all these things. We can talk about them afterwards too, but like knowing those things, it's just like if you're breaking down a feature or a long thing, like you don't have time to be like drawing every frame sometimes. If you're trying to break this stuff down, you just say like, okay, we go to like a dollying medium frontal shot, and then we cut over to a profile 2-shot, and it just for the sake of time, because usually you don't have that much time in prep, it's the brevity of that vocabulary is really helpful.
I'm actually, to that note, I am someone who, both as a director and as a DP, I'm not a big fan of storyboards unless it's for technical, like choreography reasons, because I think that, again, both as a director and as a DP, when there's storyboards on set, it becomes a really lazy reference, and a lot of times if you need to move fast, what happens is you end up being put on autopilot, and you just kind of get as close to the storyboard as you can, whether or not that's actually the best shot for what you're trying to do. And I personally find that it's really helpful when working with a DP to come up with a shot list and not necessarily storyboard, because that way you can, the DP understands what you're trying to get at, but you're not like completely hand-holding, and you can let them get the best version of what you're envisioning rather than, giving them the exact framing and composition.
To piggyback on that, with the storyboard thing, I think also people get a little too tied to the storyboards,
Yeah.
and the reality is that when you're on set, what was boarded may not be possible, or the best shot. You get there and you realize like this blocking is not right for the space,
Yeah.
or this would look so much better from here, but they're like, but the board, and you're like, shut up. The board is the board, and now we're here. Like, let's be in the,
This is better than the board.
And that's
like, I'm trying to tell you, like, this is cooler, and like, this is a better, more impactful shot, and it's gonna make the whole thing great. It's like, you have the boards, they're great, we can talk about them in pre-pro, but like, let's forget the boards. And also with what you said, like, just the language, just if I'm speaking French and you're speaking German and we don't know any mutual words, and like, we're at a loss here. Like, oh, like this, and what are we gonna do? So just like having a base of, you know, as far as framing and lighting, not specifics, but just like generalities, like I'd like soft light, I'd like this to be, you know, warm, or just things that can help someone, the DP, get an idea of what you're really looking for. And if you can't put it into words, then a picture, and you know, not just like, I want this, but this is what I like in this image, and you know, kind of translate that into what you're doing. Because yeah, ultimately it's a communication thing. Like, you have to be able to communicate efficiently, ultimately, and you know, whatever gets you there faster. Like you said, if we all agree what a close-up is, then you say, I want a close-up on so-and-so, and I'll set that up, and we'll get it, and you know, hey, is this cool, is this really great, shoot.
Yeah, like be like really clear, like from the get-go, and because your job is to make sure everyone's making the same movie. You have to make sure we're all on the same page, and just like general, like just knowing it's about discovery. Like lighting is all about experimentation, so you're going to discover things on set that are better than what you could have imagined in pre-pro. So it's about finding those things.
Yeah. And transitioning from there, how do you even begin thinking about lighting a scene? Like, I know if you walk onto a set, you have furniture, you have props or whatever, where do you start? Like, what's your process when you look at a script and you're talking to the director? Like, I know a lot of people go in and they're just like, well, I guess I'll put one light here and then fill in this dark place and maybe get rid of the shadow here, but getting into what a lot of people call cinematography is painting with light. How, like, what's your process, your creative process, starting with that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Out of order, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Just to start. I think it's a lot about blocking and how to utilize blocking of actors and how that plays in the space. I think about like where I could have sources coming from. Are there windows? Are there practical lamps? The possibilities are endless, I guess. So for me, it kind of starts with the blocking and like what's happening in the space, and then how to craft it around there.
I would definitely say for me, like one of the, you want to respond to the space for sure, and make sure it's like motivated, believable, and then also come out from a place where you have an idea of what's going on inside the character's head and what that lighting should feel like. Like you want to motivate uplight, you have to find a reason for it to, you know, feel like a horror movie that makes sense, that's not just coming from nowhere. Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of it is about setting tone. Like, as a painter of light, your job is not generally to make it look natural or as close to life as possible. I think this is something that kind of the DSLR revolution brought in that's very negative for cinematography, is that people assume that if it's natural light enough, then therefore it's good or okay cinematography. But your job as a cinematographer is primarily to convey tone, just like a sound designer, you know, builds tension or relieves tension. And I think it's really important that, you know, you have an understanding of what lights are flattering or unflattering. How is that, you know, is the person in your scene heroic? Are they dreamy? Is it a magical kind of otherworldly scene? Is it something that's very gritty? I think, you know, these are the things that you have to pay attention to when you're working, because a horror movie isn't just about running around in the woods. It's, you know, the shafts of moonlight coming in that make creepy shadows, and kind of like staccato patterns on people's faces, and things can jump out of the bushes because you didn't see them. And it's not just running with a camera at night and cranking up the ISO and hoping that it turns out okay. Because what I think is very interesting is that we have developed this aesthetic of real that's based on documentary and reality television, but it doesn't necessarily feel real, it's just what we are familiar with in terms of frame rates or type of video compression, which is why so many of the found footage movies are shot on highly compressed, like very terrible on purpose looking. But just as much as that's building an aesthetic, you can do that equally as well by saying, what visual is going to make this most terrifying.
One more just quick trick. If you're in any space, like let's say this was the space you had to light and you want to create a certain feeling, I wouldn't say literally turn off all the lights. I mean, you can if you can, but think about what it would be like if all the lights were off, because you have control over all that, and that's how you start with a blank canvas. You know what I mean? Like this room could literally be shadowy. It could be like there's just a spotlight on us. We could all be in silhouette. Like there's a million different ways you could light it. So you want to get away from the idea of what it's like right now with all these lights flipped on, and know what your basic canvas you're working with is.
Yeah. We could look wise and all-powerful, or we could look terrifying, or we could look, tiny and small. It's all kind of how you want to approach it, what you want to say. And that comes down to lighting and your angles. It's all conveying a story. So I know one of the burning questions that we get is, how the heck do I choose a camera? Like what camera do I need to make it look the best?
You choose the camera you have available. Is basically what I say. There's no camera that is going to make your stuff amazing. It's not the technology, it is how you use it. And if your project has a budget of $20 and your friend will let you borrow his like $19.99 digital video camera that takes like mini DV tapes, you use it because you have it and you can. If you can get your hands on a 5D, you take it. If you have a GoPro, you use it. You take whatever you have and you figure out, this is how this thing works. These are its strengths, these are its weaknesses, and you work to the best of your ability with those. And so it comes down to would we all like to shoot with the best new camera? Of course. Does the budget allow it? Probably not. It's about what you have access to, and not pigeonholing yourself. I need this camera, or it won't look. You can figure out a way to use whatever you've got, and I think every project is a different budget and different reasons. Like you pick different cameras. Maybe it's not the best quality image, but I'm gonna be running around for 3 weeks handheld, and I don't want to carry a camera that's that heavy for that long, so I'm gonna go with a 5D. That's what it is. There's other things to take into consideration, but really it's use whatever you have available, whatever it is. A camera's better than no camera, right?
I think the biggest compliment I ever got was when I got into my master's program and one of the students was like, I saw your reel and you have so much Alexa footage and I just can't believe, how did you get the access to that as an undergrad? I was like, that's all DSLR. I'd never even touched an Alexa before. So it was it's not about that. It's what you do with it, and people, that was the best compliment.
I actually think you're better off cutting your teeth on a really crappy camera, like an XL2 or something like that, because there's this, I don't know if you guys
if
remember this,
anyone needs an XL2, I'll let you borrow it, by the way. It's in
Yes.
my closet. It's not getting any use.
But here's why. If you're on a small ship crappy camera, then you have to make the image rich with careful composition, placing things within the frame, learning about lighting. And there's this really crappy thing where the moment when everyone became a DP, when the 5D came out, but everything where people are like, oh, it's so beautiful, it's because they opened up to a 1.4 and they let everything go out of focus. But it wasn't about composition anymore. It wasn't placing something within the frame. So I think you're actually better off having to deal with a deep focus camera that doesn't give you a lot of, and also if it doesn't have a lot of dynamic range, you have to learn how to light.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? You have to know how to expose. Whereas if you start out on an Epic, it's gonna be very forgiving.
Yeah.
You're better off wrestling with a difficult
It's also
camera.
very hard to color correct XL2 footage later.
Yeah, so you're much sharper coming out that way. And now, what gets you the best image? I have to agree with Julia that I always say a good DP on a 5D is worth 10 times more than an okay one on an Epic.
Yep.
An Epic is not going to fix like a person who doesn't know how to compose. It's just not.
That's, I will say that like composition is almost at least half of the job, right? I mean, lighting and your composition, and no camera is going to make your composition better.
Yeah.
It's just not the way it works.
There's a film that Lauren and I are doing later this year, and once many moons ago when I wrote it, I decided to do an experiment and put up an ad on Craigslist. And I made this giant spreadsheet of about 300 or 400 cinematographers that had submitted their reels. And I'd asked them what their equipment was and their reel. And first I looked through all of the reels, and then I gave them like a 1 through 5 star rating. And then I added what their kit was. And it was an almost inverse relationship. The people with the most gear available were the crappiest shooters by far, because I mean there used to be a Facebook group called like my mom bought me a red, now I'm a DP. But the thing is, like, it has become unfortunately a very common hiring practice within independent film to essentially hire the camera and then whoever comes with it, sure, whatever, they're the DP, whether they're able to actually perform the job adequately or not. And I'm very against this, but it's something that, because rental prices on the more expensive cameras are so high sometimes, it's something that people feel like they have to do and they're kind of trapped by. I mean, the correct answer for your question, in theory, is you picked the camera that's the best for the job, but the problem is that there's also this kind of mentality within the industry that if you don't have a Red, if you don't have an Alexa, then your film can't be seen somewhere. At the same time, we have like publicity people pushing the other end of the spectrum. Oh, Sean Baker shot Tangerine on an iPhone, so therefore you can all make movies and you have no excuse. Well, the only reason that Sean Baker can shoot Tangerine on an iPhone and have it in at Sundance is because he's already made a whole bunch of feature films and is highly experienced. So as Jon said, you can give a highly, highly trained DP an iPhone and they can make something out of it. That doesn't mean that somebody starting out can make anything that's going to show anywhere on an iPhone. And so for me, like, my answer to that question is within means, you know, the best camera for the job, especially because there is no perfect camera. There's no camera that's going to do 100% of what you want. Like, our camera shoots raw, but because of the way it shoots, it can't shoot super high frame rates. So somebody who's like wanting all of these things in one thing, they're never going to be able to get that because the technology doesn't exist for that. So, you know, you have to curb your expectations and don't listen to anyone who's trying to sell you on there being one golden child camera. Even the most expensive cameras out there still have certain problems that you have to mitigate. There's still rolling shutter on an Alexa, even when it is kitted out for $150,000, and there's nothing you can do about that. Then the other aspect of it is that you need to understand what your gear is and plan that into your production. You know, someone who's shooting a movie like Tangerine, you're not saying, well, I'm going to choose to film this on the iPhone rather than the Alexa. This was part of the plan. This was part of the pre-production. It may have even been part of the scripting to understand how they were going to make this movie on a very, very small budget with a small, small camera. So if you're starting out, you know, I think it's important to, you know, take that practical reality into your mind and know what you might have access to, or at least know what your budget might be, and plan for that. Because my friends at Zacuto, they do like rigs and stuff, and mostly for DSLRs. They did a shootout a couple of years ago where they basically gave 10 different cameras to different DPs. Many of them were ASC DPs, and they were from, you know, a GH2 to a 7D to a Red Epic, a Scarlett, an Alexa, F65, and a couple other variants. And they had them film the same scene, and what they found is that you are able to make all of those cameras look almost identical. And what they actually did is they polled the audience at the screening and did a tally of who thought which camera was which. And people were aghast to find that, you know, what they thought was the Alexa was actually the GH2. And that's amazing, and it's very freeing. But there is a flip side to that, which is when you flip on that Alexa, the way that it is without any lighting is what it took 5 hours for the 7D to get the same image. And so when you're planning your shoot, if you know that you have a DSLR, you know that you have a compressed image, so if you're shooting silhouettes, that's it. You can't get that detail back in post. If you're, you can't change the color that much. You have to have high contrast, things like that in order to make the image look right. You need to be planning for that from step one, because otherwise you can get in a position where you're very, very disappointed that it's not looking like Gone Girl when you're done.
Yeah. And what I want a lot of you to take away from this is that don't be discouraged or wait to make your films because I have to have a red or I have to have an Alexa to be taken seriously. And that's one of the things that is completely not true. This is about knowing your equipment, knowing the limitations, and knowing what you can do with it that's unique. It's good to take a crappy camera or your iPhone and learn first, and don't spend a ton of money renting good lenses, renting good cameras, and make your beginner mistakes on that budget. It's better to go full throttle, find something you can afford, grab your friends, learn your skills, and become a good filmmaker and really make your mistakes and that kind of stuff first. So if you're like, oh, I have this really good story but like, I can't afford a camera, it's like, what can you do with what you have?
While you're stalling, there's also the really lame aspect of that, which is a huge amount of what your footage looked like has nothing to do with the camera that it's on and everything to do with the lenses that you're using. So it's much wiser to invest in a cheaper camera. If you are buying to get a cheaper camera and get fancier lenses, because you can continue to use those lenses as you grow and as you buy and upgrade your equipment.
We'll get to questions in a little bit, but I'll remember you. Let's see, I think. Trying to pick the best question here before we move on to questions. I think when we're talking about cinematography and the cinematographer's job, when you look at a film, how do you know good cinematography? What does that mean to you?
You don't notice it.
Yeah.
When you're thinking about the shots, like the DP didn't do their job. You're supposed to be a storyteller. Like it should be an invisible part of the storytelling process. That's my opinion.
We did a slate of shorts at Slam Dance, and we awarded a best winner, and we went up and did like a Q&A after the screening, and the guy who ended up winning started talking about how he shot it, and someone in the Q&A was like, oh, it was so cool how it was a one take. And I had watched this movie 3 times. I programmed it, I'd seen it on the big screen, and not until the Q&A did I notice that it was a one take, because it was so absorbing in the actor's performance that you couldn't tell, and it was like absolutely flooring when I went back and looked at it. I think it's really tough to judge a good DP off of a reel sometimes, because it's really easy to cherry pick the best scenes, but particularly if you're working on a feature or a narrative, it's really important that you be able to keep the moments that aren't the fancy money shots in a consistent tone with the ones where you're going to really give it the all. Like, the movie that really stands out to me with great cinematography is Night of the Hunter. It's very iconic and very well known for this. You guys should check it out. It's black and white. It's still worth your time. Because even when it's just 2 characters talking, it's still so stylized and it keeps the tone together. So I think, if you like a reel that you see, I would encourage people to seek out some of the individual projects from that and see if the DP is able to keep a consistent tone throughout the project.
What about you guys, Julia?
Same thing, like being invisible. It goes back to just being authentic to the story that you're telling. I don't tend to be a fan of when cinematography draws attention to itself. So.
I think whatever services, like I mean, we've all seen movies that are about the style and not the substance, but usually it's the style serving the story. I think is what makes it's kind of the best marriage. The cinematography is only helping enhance or tell that story effectively, not calling attention to itself.
It's
Yeah.
also important to note there's not one best way. There's many right ways to do things. It's not about finding the one
Yes.
way. So.
Yes.
Yeah.
Often some of the most interesting stuff is the stuff that's breaking the rules, honestly. It's doing things that everyone's saying, like, well, we don't do it that way. That's where it gets interesting.
Beware of listening to directors and being the director that says you're not supposed to do that. Even Casablanca breaks the 180 line every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll open up to some questions. We'll start with you because I remember you were
Thanks.
excited.
They were in regard to choosing cameras. I really don't know anything about cameras. So you were talking about the Alexa and the Epic. I mean, where are they in relation to, say, like the Red and the Dragon? I don't know. And I had another question as well. So
That's getting like into, there's a lot of different specifics that we can get into, but the Epic is one of the Red cameras and the Dragon is one of the Red cameras, and the Red and the Alexa are up in the professional line, so that's up around like the 50,000 and up. Yes. It's by
Yeah,
Ari.
Epic is Red and Alexa is Ari Alexa. Come talk to us about what your project is and like what budget you're working with and how fast you have to shoot it, and we'll tell you what camera is probably gonna get you the most.
When
stuff.
in doubt, talk to your DP.
Yeah.
They usually
Yeah.
can give you some options.
Yeah, but it's a rabbit hole. That's why we're like,
Yeah, it's like we can't really get into
burn the
it.
rest of the time.
Give me a spreadsheet.
You mentioned earlier how important it is to have a relationship with the director. How important is it to have a relationship with your editor too?
It's a great question, actually. I did a feature years and years and years ago where the editor was one of my friends. And it wasn't until we got into the cutting room that she was brought on board. And she was like, why would you guys shoot like that? Why'd you do this? Why'd you do that? And then I had to be like, well, look, these are the reasons. I think if you can all, like, as much collaboration as you have between every single department, like I want to be talking to the wardrobe stylist and the costume designer, I want to talk to the production designer, I want to talk to every single person so that we all are sharing this information and collaborating together. If you have a director who's really, like, knows the film they want and can communicate that really easily to the editor, and the director of this great dialogue, and they know certain sequences are going to be cut certain ways, that's only going to help me with what shots we get and prioritizing what shots we get. If I know, I want this cool dolly shot, and the editor's like, they'll never use it, blah, blah, and the director, maybe I'll use it, maybe I won't. It's like, okay, well that's now not as important as getting like all of our coverage of the dialogue for this scene. So it can only help. Like, I think it can only make your job that much easier and the whole project that much more cohesive. I'm never one to say no to like meeting with the editor or the other random departments. Like, bring it on. Let's all chat about this.
Yeah, and that's part of the director's job too, is to be that bridge between departments. So usually the director and the editor will have really in-depth talks, and then the director will bring that to his conversations with the DP. But meeting together is definitely like, why not?
Yeah.
But the DP has, then that's a good thing to cover too, is the DP, you're working with very specific people on set, and it's usually art department and costume and your gaffer who's taking care of the lighting and actually setting up lights and stuff like that. So you have people that you do work with directly, but usually with post you're working through the director.
Sorry, I do want to add one thing. Really quick, I think you should, if you're a director, you should keep your DP out of the edit bay.
Yep.
Because as a DP personally, if I were in the edit bay on VJHS, I would have made all the wrong calls. I'd been like, but that one's more in focus, and like that one like looks so much nicer. And it's like, no, the only thing that matters is the performance. That's why you're there. The cinematography is decorative compared to what the performance is to me. So like, you need to be making those decisions based on what's best for the movie overall. And I would just, if I was directing something, I would keep my DP away from the editing.
I'm always disappointed when a couple of different shots like didn't quite make the cut, and I was like, but they look so cool.
But we have the
it's
wrong
just like, we
motives.
don't need it.
Yeah.
And
It's
then
almost
the
like
other
I
shot
wanna
that's
know.
there is
I
like,
wanna know.
I don't think there's a single project where there's not a shot or two where I'm like, really, you used that one?
Yeah.
There's
Come
always an
on.
embarrassing
And I don't think
shot.
it literally has not changed since film school. Like, there's always one or two I'm like,
But we're the only ones thinking that. Like,
right,
everybody else-
right, of course.
The audience won't think that.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
They didn't even know there was another option.
There was a question over here, Joe?
Yeah, this actually kind of goes back to being visible, I guess, as far as your style. But do you guys find that you might have your own style going into just like, I guess, framing a shot or even lighting in general? Do you guys have your own, like, I guess, sense of color to bring to the shot?
I mean, I think that's why you hire DPs, because, you know, their style jives with the style that you are hoping to create. I mean, everybody brings something different to the table, and I'm sure that each of us has specific things. I don't know if we could necessarily put our fingers on why ours is different, but I think you can tell just from the clips that everybody has a very different eye.
And it comes down to like the tools that you call upon. Usually you'll have, you know, normal rigs that you want to use because you know what they do. And I sometimes feel like, why do I do this all the time? Maybe I should like break out of it, but it works and it, you know what I mean? Budget-wise, everything is based on that stuff too, so.
Yeah. You'll have directors picking specific like a different DP for each project sometimes, and some directors like to stick with the same guy. Like Spielberg has stuck with Kaminsky for a long time. But depending on the project, if there's a DP that really understands, like, oh, it's an action movie, like I need someone who's done this before, or it's a more quieter drama, I need someone who thinks this way. It's all kind of dependent on the project, and they will go to the DP that has like those inclinations.
That said, one of my biggest idols is Robert Elswit, because he, like you
The
can compare,
chameleon.
he's a chameleon, exactly. Like you compare Boogie Nights to Nightcrawler to like even Punch Drunk Love. Like there's definitely very decisive aesthetic decisions to There Will Be Blood, but like still he kind of disappears in each movie. He seems to have a different mentality in terms of how to approach the color. And I kind of like hitting reset on the Nintendo every time he started a project. And like we did that every 90s commercial ever thing. I was thinking about what a spastic 90s DP would do. He would be like on the widest lenses possible, and you know, there's other projects where I'd be like, we're never going to go any wider than a 50. You know, I think that's fun to kind of get in that character. But
You know, there's like a few DPs that you'd be like, okay, that looks like a Roger Deakins movie. But then there's the other DPs that you're not quite sure, and it's kind of fun to like play around and see what you can do.
I think there's something to be said for, like, I couldn't actually verbalize what my style is or my aesthetic. I have worked with directors like, oh yeah, that looks like your work, that's you. And I'm like, I don't know what that means. But cool, I'm glad you hired me. But there's something to be said for being able to be that chameleon because really it's about the project, and no two projects are the same. And so if you're really focused on the project itself and what it needs, that kind of, your style works with it, but it's really this other kind of beast. So it's cool, and that's kind of what's great about the job, is that you get to kind of continually mold and reshape your style. Constantly, and it's changing, and like
You'll
anything
never,
that involves.
you'll never reach it. It'll always be a
You'll
thing
never
that-
be
Yeah.
like,
You won't,
okay,
yeah.
I'm the perfect cinematographer now.
And I,
My
yeah,
lighting is
Even
always
when you are,
good.
you
Not
don't
even
win
cool.
any Oscars like Roger Deakins.
someday is the Susan Lucci of the Oscars.
Any more questions? Yes.
You mentioned about breaking rules, or you guys did. What cardinal rules are you most fond of seeing broken and done well?
There's always a fear of shadows, it seems like, with a lot of big movies and big directors. They're afraid of silhouettes. They're afraid of letting someone's face go completely black on one side. I remember learning in film school, like The Godfather, they saw the dailies and they panicked, and they were like, this is too dark. Like, what is, like, but it's become an icon for the look and the feel, and I mean, more recently, like Deacons did some interesting silhouettes and stuff in a James Bond movie, and usually James Bond is like this bright, action, colorful, everything's, you know, the same exposure. There's not too much shadow and shaping to it, and he shot like this last big huge sequence with a fire behind people, and they were completely black for a good couple minutes. So I kind of like seeing like, you know what, you can underexpose some stuff, you can overexpose some stuff. Like playing with exposure is one of my favorite things to do.
Really quick, funny story. I'm drawing a blank, but the DP of The Godfather, so the story goes, actually put like white pieces of paper in the background of scenes when they wrote, if you can read this, it's too bright, so that when they were printing the film, they couldn't, like the producers, and they couldn't print it up. He's like, it is supposed to be this dark, there's a reason. That's how he protected his work. Which is a whole other topic you could get into with cinematography. I don't know, I break rules all the time. I just don't believe, even like we're saying, like the 180-degree line, like sometimes you jump that and it works. I am never one to shy away from a dark frame, and there's a DP that I work with as his gaffer a lot, and he and I are both, we have to check each other sometimes because it's like, it's not dark enough. It's like, it could be, I'm like, it's dark, it's so dark. Yeah, I don't know. And I like to play with color when I can, when the job calls for it in really like unexpected ways. If the job allows, I don't know, I also like to mess with like framing, like composition. This whole like, you learn the grid, you know, the thirds thing, and everyone's like, yeah, the thirds, it's great. And I'm like, okay, cool. But like, what can we, says who and why, and maybe not. Like maybe half a person's face in the frame is cool for this shot, for this reason. And just kind of not tying yourself down in any way to any like, well, the book says this. Like the whole thing is, I feel like still, it's just like you get these toys and you get to play, and it's all just kind of an experiment, and you just go out there and you try stuff. And you see if it works, and yeah.
A lot of really iconic or classic shots were happened upon by accident. A lot of DPs call them miracles, or little miracles. And it's having the eye to recognize that and be like, yes, this looks awesome, I want to do this and commit to this. Just kind of be open to like little accidental surprises, like maybe, you know, a light accidentally turned off and it looks way better now, or, you know, something like that.
I like experimenting with the aspect ratio. I just shot a feature in 4:3. It's like Academy ratio. It's square. If you watch, there's a great movie that won the best picture for a foreign film called Ida, that was shot in Academy ratio, which if you guys don't know, standard is like 16:9 or sometimes 1:8:5. And then DPs tend to really like 2:3:5 because there's lots of room in the frame. But I thought 4:3 was so fun. It's a square ratio, and it means that like you can play with headroom. It's the best frame for a close-up, and frankly, you know, if you get tired of the same old compositions, like you can do these really crazy group shots and stuff in 4:3 that like you can't normally do in a wider aspect. It's kind of cool. So I like that for composition.
Yeah, for me it's definitely about, I like to break the rules by having not that much coverage if I can. Because, you know, in film school or in any how to be a filmmaker kind of book, there's this sort of, you need to get the master shot to establish your location, and you have to get your medium and your close-up and your wide and your over the shoulder and then some inserts. And what that leads is a lot of people just saying, well, I'm going to just shoot everything in the entire scene and not make any stylistic choices really other than like, I guess the frame looks okay kind of. And as Julia mentioned before, like really good cinematography is not covering your ass, it's getting the best blocking so that you don't have to cover your ass. Scenes like, you know, if you guys have seen The Graduate, you know, it's like Benjamin is frequently in the background with Mrs. Robinson in the foreground. She might be lifting up her leg, which becomes kind of mysterious, and then it kind of frames him a little bit, and it tells us a lot about the character, and it tells us that he's scared, that she's dominating, that she's mysterious, that he's cornered, and they don't really have any other shots in some of these scenes because it's completely unnecessary. You know, the more times you cut, the more obvious it's a movie, kind of, in my opinion. Like, it takes you out of the scene. And there are some directors that are kind of sadistic about one takes, like, in one of my favorite movies, Clockwork Orange, there's a scene in the prison library, and they're just standing talking to each other for like 5 minutes straight, and that way, like, he's trying to make you feel the horrible monotony of the life that they're living in, but it's still really excruciating to watch. But then there's other times where you have a scene and it's so well blocked that you don't really see it. And we need to get out of this mentality that having all this coverage is what is professional, because if you actually sit down and watch a movie or watch a TV show, very frequently in TV show, you're not getting a ton of coverage. You're getting a wide, maybe you'll get a couple of singles in there, but a lot of times, you know, you might have 2 people sit down in a car and we just get that angle over someone's shoulder, and that's the only shot that you're getting. And I think a lot of people get bogged down trying to get way too much because they are afraid to make a decision and commit to it.
Go ahead.
I was saying, it all comes down to what's going to tell your story better. If you can say it in one shot, don't bother with spreading it out and diluting it over 5 shots.
If you want to be taken to school on how to do a one take in a scene without noticing, without being Birdman, like look at my one take, like a one take you would never notice, watch Jaws. And watch any old Spielberg films, actually.
Spielberg?
There's like 3-minute long scenes that are one take and they're incredible.
Jurassic Park, I just realized had this really long one take that I only noticed like last year. And I was like, because he just has different frames within one, and it's just like, you don't notice it at all, you're completely swept up. He's amazing. And also continuing on that note, if you look at old Emmanuel Lubezki films, he's the guy who did Gravity, he shot Birdman. He's kind of known for his epic one takes right now. If you go to his older films like Working Girl and The Birdcage, A Little Princess, he has these very long takes that are just very natural and don't call attention to themselves. So he's that's part of his style for a long time. He's very experienced with that. So I like seeing that progression of his work from like having a 2-minute conversation with Robin Williams and Nathan Lane that doesn't cut away to this crazy one take with Birdman. So one more question and then we're done. I thought I saw your name back here.
Oh. When you're on set, how do you want your interactions with actors to go? As a DP or as a director or both?
That's a really good question, and I think that you want the directors to set the tone of what your interaction is going to be with the actor, because there's some actors that don't really like talking to the DP, there's some directors that don't want any other crew member giving direction, but the reality of being the DP is that you're the one controlling the actor's image, and so they want to have some kind of relationship with you. But generally, you know, you want to follow the director's lead and, you know, let them know at the beginning of the shoot, like, hey, I need to go ask her this or that. You know, sometimes if it's a more intimate, smaller situation, or where you're like right up in their face, like it doesn't make sense to necessarily like walk off and talk to a third party and then come back, but you have to kind of build that trust between yourself and the director, so that the director feels comfortable with you basically communicating their ideas to the actor.
I think I think you should have a friendly relationship with them, because they have to be comfortable around you, but never actually professionally. The only things you should ever talk about, at least for me, are this is where your mark is, please, and then sometimes if you're doing like noir lighting, like if you look into this light over here, that's right, you know, like if you can see this light, you're hitting your mark, that kind of thing. You're basically helping them to look their best, but not to an extent that it messes with the performance, for me.
Yeah. Direction should always come from the director unless he says otherwise.
Yeah, I think the kind of go-to I start out a project with would be I will talk to the talent about their mark and maybe adjusting their mark for a framing. You know, if they're a little bit off, like, hey, take a half step to the right. And that's about it. And then you kind of gauge, as you were saying, you kind of gauge the level of communication that's kind of allowed. You know, maybe some actors are really into joking and talking with the crew and some aren't, some, you know, you just kind of feel it out. But I always started that kind of like very professional friendly but standoffish in a way kind of role, where I'm just here to tell you the very particular things about the photography and I'm kind of hands-on, I'm not giving you direction or anything like that.
And as Christian Bale taught us all, be respectful of the actors while they're acting, and if they're performing, don't do things like move lights around in the background and things that can distract them and annoy them and make them seem that you're being disrespectful towards what they bring to the set.